Are you a church leader trying to navigate the tension of doing ministry both online and in person? Welcome to the Bricks and Clicks Church Leadership Podcast, a podcast where church leaders and ministry experts share ideas, solutions, and experiences about making church work both in person and online. Meet the hosts of Bricks and Clicks, a Brit and an Aussie who became friends in their efforts of making churches irresistible. Duncan Banks lives just outside London, England, and Jason Perkins lives in Brisbane, Australia. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Banksy and Perko.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar tonight with Dave Adamson, Reggie Joyner, and my good friend Duncan Banks from the UK. It's good evening here in Australia, but if you are watching from the UK, hope that you're enjoying your lunch today. And if you're on the East Coast of the United States where Dave and Reggie are located, good morning. And I hope you got a really strong cup of coffee to get your day started. And we hope that this webinar will help you get your day started in a great way. I'm actually certain that it'll do that, especially for those of you. Look at that. Reggie's got an orange cup and he's representing well today. For those of you that don't know, those that are on the call, Duncan Banks is the director of the Further Faster Network in London, England, and helps to lead a network, an affiliate network of North Point Partner Network in the United States for the UK and Ireland. Dave Adamson is transitioning to a brand new role, which is super exciting, directing the initiatives of Orange in both Australia and New Zealand. And so super excited about that transition, Dave, and we're pumped to get you back down to the Southern Hemisphere here shortly. COVID willing. We used to say Lord willing. Now we say COVID willing. But nonetheless, we're excited to have you back down under, Dave. And then Reggie Joyner, for those of you that don't know, Reggie Joyner, founder, CEO of Orange, and was actually one of the founding members of the team that started North Point Community Church. Some of you may know the name Andy Stanley. Reggie and that team launched that church now, I think 25 years ago. Is that right, Reggie?
Long time ago.
Reggie, some of the times when I explain to people Orange or I talk about Orange curriculum, one of the first questions I get from people oftentimes is, hey, what's with the name? Where did this name Orange come from? And I know that it has to do with you guys' philosophy of ministry. Could you maybe just share with us what that's all about?
Sure. We originally were called the ReThink Group, and because we were rethinking a lot of how we do ministry, discipleship. And somewhere along the way, because we represent the partnership that exists between the church and the home, we decided, because we kept saying two combined influences make a greater difference or bigger difference than just two separate influences. The idea being that when we have discovered churches and homes getting on the same page, the impact on a kid is just greater. So we decided, well, let's find something that illustrates that. So we thought, well, you could take two different colors, put them together and create a third color. And so then we started going, well, we can't use pink. Breast cancer has pink. We can't use green. Environmentalists have green. We can't use purple. Prince has purple. Yeah. And so we decided, you know what? Orange works. I mean, it's the light of the home, the light of the church, which is yellow, the heart of the family, which is red. And again, together, they make a different kind of impact and a different kind of result. And so what happened was we created the Orange Conference and to say, hey, let's all get together. Let's figure out how to make sure that kids pastors and student pastors partner with the church and the home. And about 3 or 4 years in, we did a national survey with churches all over the country and asked the question, what are your perceptions of ReThink? How do you see them? And everybody kept saying, oh, you mean the people who do Orange? Yeah. And so somewhere in the process, the board said, well, why are we calling it ReThink? We should just call it Orange. So.
I love it. Hey, we've got people tuning in from all parts of the world, obviously down here in the Southern Hemisphere. I see a bunch of people in the chat that are saying hi to Aussie Dave, which is awesome. We also have some people from the UK and Ireland that have registered and joined us on the webinar today as well. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from, wherever you're watching from. If you would just jump into the chat, let us know where you're coming from and also what church that you're affiliated with. Maybe you serve there as a staff member, or maybe you're a key volunteer, which, by the way, we think that the volunteers are actually the ones who run the whole show anyway. So if whatever capacity you're in, We'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what church you represent. And then Duncan, why don't you just give us real quickly overview of what we're going to be doing today? And I know we've got some big things we want to tackle with Reggie and Dave on the call.
Jason, I love this. All the Brits are just waiting for someone to invite them to chat, whereas all the Aussies are straight in there shouting loudly, "I'm here! This is me!"
That's
it's just great. Absolutely,
so good.
Hey, so by the end of our time together, we want to help those of you who are really struggling to connect with your families. We want to give you some tips and tricks, mainly from Reggie and Dave, because of their vast experience. Give you some tips and tricks on how to re-engage your families and how to re-engage kids and re-engage teenagers. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with pastors who are saying, I feel like I've lost my families. I feel like we're losing a generation of children and teenagers because church is online and people are choosing to watch on demand. They're not all turning up at the same time. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with either volunteers or staff members who work with students and kids and teenagers who say, I know how to do it when they're in the room, but I am totally confused as to how to do it online. And it seems like in the UK, we're going to be doing online church exclusively for a good 6 months plus yet. So we've got a long haul in this. So anything you guys can give us to help us, some just simple things, some next steps will be like gold dust to our pastors. So by the end of this call, you'll have some clear next steps, some clear ideas of how you can re-engage your families and your children and get them to fall in love with Jesus and fall in love with your church all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. So Reggie, one of the things we're noticing as I, like Duncan, talk with church leaders across Australia, families and parents especially are just being asked to do so much. Like the home has become the center of the universe. It's the place we're doing schooling. People are working from home. They're socializing, obviously at home because they're stuck at home. If you're in Melbourne right now in Australia, they're on the strictest lockdown that we've had in our country in this entire pandemic right now because of the outbreak. So the home is just being asked to do so many things and inundated with so many responsibilities. What do you feel like, Reggie, is probably the greatest way a church right now could partner with parents during this time when they're being asked to do so much?
Yeah, I think I would kind of start back at the beginning for a second and just qualify in my mind as a leader or church leader what my goal really is. I think I have to go back to the beginning because I think we have been programmed for so long to think our goal to reach parents, to help families is to actually get them into our building. And so somewhere in the context of us having decades and decades of thinking that's the win, that's how we measure success, now we're having an identity crisis because all of a sudden we can't get them into our building. We can't do what we've always done. And so that implies something else that I would challenge everybody who's listening to think about, because I think if you would wrap your head around this one idea, it would open you up to start being creative in different ways. I think creativity can thrive in crisis because we're forced to think outside of the boxes that we're used to. And so I'm going to give you this one idea. And the one idea is this: when we help parents win, it has less to do with getting them in our building than it does to do with us seeing what their needs are and meeting their needs. We have been programmed for so long to think the best way for me to help a parent win is to get them into my program. The problem is that's not the way parents think. There aren't any parents out there going, hey, I think you're really helping me win when I come to your church. They've got all these other issues, which are now magnified, which are their relationships, their education of their kids. As a matter of fact, if we had on this Zoom call today, most of the parents in your community, and they were listening to us have this conversation, they would be going, whoa, wait a second, I'm confused. You think what I need somehow is to get back in your building? That's really not what I need.
It's the last thing I'm thinking about.
So here's the bottom line, and then we can go from here. And if we get into the technology and the online and how to do Sundays at home and some of those kind of things, we'll talk about what that can look like too. But at the end of the day, somewhere in the context of our framework and our thinking, we've got to recognize that the average parent is out there worried about the future of their kid. The church cares about the faith of a kid. Now, here's the problem. Most parents, not just the parents who come to your church, but especially the 80% of the parents outside your church who've never come to your church, even before the pandemic, they're not thinking about the faith of their kid. They're thinking about the future of the kid. The most important thing the church can do is to build a bridge between the idea of how faith affects the future of a kid. We leave that gap so wide open sometimes because we don't seem to care about the real issues the family's dealing with, that the family doesn't really see the church as a solution or as a part of their everyday life. That's the pivot we have to make. The pivot we have to make has to start with how we see the family and how the family sees us.
I love it. So good. So good. I love, Reggie, you just said out loud what every parent is saying. I am totally concerned with the future of my child right now. I've got 3 of my own, and 19, 17, 15, even though they're a bit older, and I'm kind of in this transition of moving from parent to coach right now. That is the top of mind thing that I'm thinking about all the time, is their future. Obviously, as a faith-based leader, I
Sure.
think that their faith is a big part of their future, but that's not the case for everybody. And how can we marry those two things together? So good. So good. So on a practical level, Reggie, then, what are some things that you are seeing either churches already doing or things that you wished the church was doing to put those two things together? Is there anything on a practical level that just comes to your mind?
Well, I know as an organization, we've pivoted because we're already in digital spaces and we're already using videos and all kinds of tools that are digital to help families have conversations. My greatest encouragement is to hear or to get, I actually get families who send me pictures of themselves watching our videos that we use on Sunday morning in church in their home. We have a Sunday at home program where churches can actually customize these videos, because most churches were already programmed to have their Sunday morning sermon, online. So that's one thing. But most churches aren't programmed to take the content that they're doing with kids every week and have it packaged or presented in a way where it can go right into the home. So in our organization, we pivoted about 4 months ago to simply allow families and churches to customize everything we're doing so it could go into the home, specifically so that on Sunday mornings, there's a Sunday at home program. And there's another piece of this that I think is interesting. And I don't know enough about Australia and England to kind of speak into your culture, but I do know this: in America, before the pandemic, there were already a lot of families who didn't go to church. The pandemic is just a reminder to us that most of the parents aren't coming anyway. And so what I challenge leaders to think about in terms of Sunday at church and Sunday at home is that there were already a lot of families that were Sunday at home families before the pandemic ever happened. So what would it look like? And this is where I would try to challenge everybody to think outside of their box. What would it look like if the family down the road from your church or in the community that your church is in who doesn't attend your church, what would it look like for them to call your church their partner, even if they never come to your church on a Sunday morning?
Yeah.
Because when the lights get turned back on, and I really believe this, I know this is true, when everything is over and we're past this, families who are committed to the church, who are Sunday at church families, most of them are coming back. They're going to show back up, and our programming will still exist. But during this window of time, when we're having to figure out how to build a bridge to their homes, what would it look like if we started being more intentional about going after the parents who have never come to our church, who for whatever reason in their mindset don't think Sunday morning in a building with 3 songs and a sermon is really what they want to participate in? What does it look like to build a different bridge to them so that when this is all over, we still have a partnership and a relationship with them that's so much bigger than our buildings? So I think that requires us, right, Dave? That requires us to use the platforms that they use in their education systems and everywhere else to build a different kind of discipleship model.
And what you're saying, Reggie,
can I just dive in? This is brand new thinking here, Reggie, for so many of us, because I think as family ministries working with students and teens and kids, we've basically worked with the students that came to our building, the kids that came into our building. They were our flock. They were the parents and the kids that we worked with. And what you're beginning to talk about now is we've got to ask ourselves different questions, because we've got to start asking ourselves, how do we attract kids and teenagers and parents who aren't already here? And I don't know, as there are many youth pastors and kids ministers who've ever asked that question, because we're just working with the ones we've got. So, you know, online, how do we start equipping our kids and our teenagers and our parents to get involved with other families and invite other families? And how do we start reaching out to families, like you say, who could be so helped by our church, but have no idea we even exist? How do we begin with those kind of conversations?
You want to jump in, Dave? I know you've got the digital background.
Yeah, there's so many ways that you know those conversations can be had, Duncan. And I think to Reggie's point earlier, we need to be leveraging those tools that you know, parents, families, kids are already using, and start being in those spaces. That's why, you know, one of the things, you know, I've talked with both of you guys about in the past has been the emphasis of leaning into a platform like YouTube, for example, because the reality is, you know, nobody's sitting at home going, I don't know what to do with my kids right now around this situation. I wonder if there's an answer on northpoint.org. They're just not doing that. I wish they were, but they're just not. But what they are doing is they're going to YouTube and they're typing in, how do I homeschool my kids better? How do I get through a vacation time when we're all stuck at home? You know, in Melbourne, Australia at the moment, how do I get through 5 weeks of lockdown where I'm only allowed to go 5 kilometers from my house and only one person at a time can, like, that's what they're Googling at the moment. And so if the church can start leveraging tools like YouTube, I think that's when we really start to make a difference in those spaces. And this is why, you know, I think I might have mentioned this to you guys before, but this is why one of the things I love is, you know, Orange has been putting up on YouTube this Sundays at Home program, and just giving parents the opportunity to really bridge that gap that Reggie had spoken about, but doing it on a platform that people are accessing anyway. That's where I think we can start to win.
Yeah. And I would also say, go ahead. Yep. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Reggie. Go ahead.
If we start back at the beginning, and there are 2 or 3 unique things that our organization represents as a value in the church. You know, one is church plus home, which we talked about a while ago. The other is the value of small group and relationships. I think relationships have to be redefined, but don't abandon the potential of a small group leader who's been connected to his teenagers for 2 or 3 years, and how they show up through text, through digital spaces, through a small group app, through 2 or 3 ways to stay connected to their teenagers are different than what they're used to. But it's important for them to leverage every tool they can, even if it's to simply put kids in a rotation and make a phone call and just encourage them. You know, I think that somewhere in the context of this, we're seeing digital small groups happen a lot. I know our student ministry turned for the student ministry and youth ministry programs, a lot of our small groups into digital spaces so they could do Zoom calls around the small group questions, watch a video and come back and do that. I think those are going to work to some degree, but it's not going to work the way the physical presence worked. And so I think realigning, you know, the yardstick so that volunteers who are doing this don't feel defeated if 3 kids show up or 3 teenagers have a conversation. It's back to Andy's thing. He's always said, do for a few what you wish you could do for many. I mean, I think it's so important right now to just make sure that that's good. So it's so important right now to make sure that we don't measure our success the way we've measured our success. Because if we do, we're going to feel deflated and defeated. And I'd love to talk about the idea of the volunteers right now for just a second, because most volunteers right now are scrambling and they're not sure what to do. And so staff members are trying to come up with different lists of things to give volunteers, and volunteers are going, but I don't think this is working. And there's this disconnection that's happening with volunteers. And I would love to lean into staff members and say, be careful that you don't give your volunteers more and more things to do that aren't working, or just give them busy work, because volunteers can see through that. I think the most important thing for a staff member to do right now for a volunteer is to do for the volunteer what he hopes or she hopes the volunteer will do for 2 or 3 kids.
So good.
That is just show up for the volunteer.
So good.
Build a relationship with the volunteer. Pray for the volunteer.
So good.
Check in with them every week. Be the pastor of the volunteer.
Yeah.
Because the volunteer sees past, do you really care about me, or do you care about what I can do for you?
Yeah.
So I think more than any other time, there is this unique opportunity. I even heard about a church the other day that when they started up their church on Sunday morning with social distancing and limited space at about a 20% capacity of what they would typically be able to do, making sure they were keeping all the rules, related to COVID, they only started church service for the volunteers. They only let the volunteers be the ones who show up. And because they know the investment in relationships with those key leaders will be huge as they go forward on the other side of this issue. So I would say what a great opportunity for those of you who are staff, or those of you who are directors, or even volunteers in charge of the volunteers. This is a great time to just pour into their life everything you can do. Deliver groceries if you have to. I mean, what can you do to help them?
Yeah.
I love that. I absolutely
Sounds
love that.
Sounds a lot, Reggie, like a guy in the first century named Jesus, what he did for 12 guys that changed the world, huh? So good. So good. Love that. Duncan, go ahead. I know you had a question or.
No. I was going to ask, Reggie, with your, and you too, Dave, you see the church at large now, and you must, because I know Dave in particular, you think a lot about what future church might look like. But what do you see will change about children's ministry and about working with students and teenagers because of what's happened in this pandemic, because people have got used to online content and not feeling guilty about not showing up at 10:30 on a Sunday morning? How do you think family ministry will change in the future for the church? What should we be looking out for?
Dave, you want to go first?
No, please. Age before beauty.
You just have the hair, so you're bragging. Here's the thing. I think the church had already changed. I think the way community has seen the church, and I alluded to this a while ago. I mean, when we look at the stats of the people in our communities who have stopped going to church long before COVID, I mean, people had changed their perception about the church. And I think the most beautiful, powerful thing about this awful crisis is it raised a flag for the church to go, oh, what happens when people stop coming? Oh, what about the people who had already stopped coming?
Yeah.
Why weren't we thinking about them anyway?
Yeah.
And I think it's going to require us to kind of live in two spaces. One is the space of the people who do come back, and they will, but I don't know what percentage they're going to come back. I don't know how slow that ramp's going to be back in. But before that happens, let's remember that the church in its growth from a physical building and people attending a building had been plateauing and declining anyway. So, and that's the news that we all just have to embrace. And that has sent a message for the last decade or 2 decades that we have to rearrange how we make sure that we're helping a community and helping families and helping teenagers. And that's why, we think a relationally driven organization is important, because relationally driven organizations and relationally driven churches are going to have powerful moments that are happening in homes and happening in coffee shops. And the church is the catalyst for that. But somewhere in the context, and this is probably a hard pill to swallow, but somewhere in the context of how we measure success, we have to measure success by how many adults are connected to teenagers and kids on a consistent basis. We got to measure success by how many students and teenagers are showing up, not on a building, but to serve their community, because that's as much a catalyst discipleship as Bible study, prayer, and worship. We've got to measure success on how many parents that are disengaged are getting engaged with a strategy. And again, not just attending something, but in a strategy that works in their home. I mean, the yardsticks have to change. And the other thing that I would say, and I hate to just bring this up because this is definitely an American issue, is we can't disciple a generation if we don't understand how making disciples is connected to loving your neighbor. we for some reason forget that those two things are connected. And when Jesus, said to the religious elite, here's the greatest commandment, love God, love your neighbors yourself. He was setting in motion a new way of thinking about what we do. And I think sometimes we think it's possible to make disciples without loving your neighbor. But when it comes to how we're reaching our communities and how we care about the people, and in America, we're dealing with, the racial tension. We're dealing with an unprecedented political election that's polarizing the country. We're dealing with people that are in different tense situations all the time. And it seems like a dark moment, but what a great opportunity for the church to show what it looks like to actually love your neighbor, and your neighbor being someone who doesn't think like you, who doesn't believe like you, what a great opportunity. And so somewhere in the context of the church of the future, we've got to realize that the loving your neighbor piece has got to be precedent to the making disciple piece, because the generation who's watching us, who's deciding what they think about Jesus and who's deciding what they think about the church, is going to make their decision based on how we treat each other.
Yeah, they always have.
So good.
Sure,
So good.
absolutely.
Yeah. That is, I'm so glad I let you go first, Reggie, because that is just absolutely brilliant. I remember just this past week reading a quote from Bruxy Cavey, who's a pastor up in Canada. And to Reggie's point, he said, loving people is the primary way we love God. And sometimes I think we miss that. To Reggie's other point, church attendance in the UK, church attendance in Australia, church attendance in the US was declining a long time before COVID hit. We see all these statistics that had come out in the 12 months, 18 months before we all got shut into lockdown that said that even people who go to church stopped going to church. And they stopped going because even if the church wasn't, they were starting to move to online anyway. They were listening to podcasts, they were watching messages on demand, they were watching online services. So, I've been saying for a couple of years, I don't think that church attendance is decreasing, it's decentralizing, because people are accessing the content somewhere else. So how does it look moving into the future, to answer your question, Duncan? I think that what I hope is that church leaders, church volunteers, like Reggie had mentioned, will be more connected with the students and the families that they're leading than ever before, and that they will leverage technology to be in their lives more often than just for that 1 hour on a Sunday. Jason, you mentioned before that this sounds radically like somebody in the first century. Well, have a look what Jesus did. He spent 24/7 with 12, and I would argue this theologically, 12 teenage boys. He spent 24/7. He was constantly in their life. Yet we built a church model that said, hey, come on Sunday, and then that's it. It's over. We'll see you next Sunday. Like literally, that's how we closed out services. Hey, see you all next Sunday. What's that communicating to a student? What's that communicating to a family? We've got no interest in being in your life during the week. But what the pandemic has done is it's given us the opportunity to be in their life. And we've set this new model that I hope continues even after lockdown is over.
I would love to add another piece to this too, because I know that when we start talking about church attendance and the investments that we've made in building buildings and all of that, part of my disadvantage in this conversation is I'm maybe older than everybody. I'm not sure if I am or not. I'm not going to start asking ages a little bit. So,
I'm 21.
Okay. I go back to when I was in my 20s, and there were books being written about the church without walls and why it's important for us to not, think about the church in the context of the building. This isn't new news. This isn't like, oh, wow, have we ever thought about, being a church beyond the walls of the church? I mean, this is not new. This is something, though, at this point in time, and then I think this is why it's a defining moment. In this point in time, we are forced to think about this in a way because of this pandemic that we haven't in my lifetime. I mean, because up until now, a church could decline by 50 or 100 people and figure out other creative ways to, keep the lights on and keep moving. And we're still effective because we're still, learning the word. And I think, we can easily in the church is the easiest organization on the planet to lose momentum and to lose attendance and still be successful. So I want to just say that. And then I want to say this. I absolutely believe the assembling of ourselves together will always be a value, and it'll always be something important. I don't think we're going to wake up in 10 or 15 years and there are no church buildings and there aren't people gathering together to worship. I think that's going to be a part of our culture. But here's an interesting thing. And again, I don't know stats in your countries, but in our country, when you look at from the boomers to the millennials, and you look at the percentage of those who attend church that were boomers, that were my age, and versus the percentage of millennial parents who participate in church, there's been a decline. The interesting thing is, when you look at the percentage, and I want to make sure I say this right, the percentage of the people who identify as Christians in both the boomers and the millennials, it stayed the same. So in other words, if I was a boomer parent and I identified with Christ, there was about a 50% chance that I participated in church. If I'm a millennial and I identify with Christ, there's about a 50% chance I attend church. So is our goal to get more people to attend church, or is our goal to get more people to identify with Christ? I mean, somewhere in the context, there has to be a shift. Instead of the driving force behind us being, we got to get more people to come to church, more people to come to church, more people to come to church. We have to expand our definition of what the church does beyond the Sunday morning framework and help more and more people through relationships, through groups, through digital platforms, through every way we can understand who Jesus is. Because if the number of people who identify with Jesus goes up, it will indirectly affect how the church attendance is. It's just that we're focused on the wrong thing to move the needle, if that makes sense.
I think, Reggie, what you're saying is we missed shifting what we measure, even though our audience changed the way they engaged. And that's what I think you're saying as well, Dave, is that our audience changed their engagement model from attendance to, in some ways, consuming. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying, hey, I can access you in other ways beyond coming to your building. But we as church leaders, we failed to change what we were measuring. And so instead of measuring engagement with people in whatever format they choose, we continue to measure engagement by, you come to our building and we can count you easily. And we've got to, as church leaders, to your point, Reggie, change the way that we provide access to the information, the content, the discipleship, and the relationships that we're providing. But then I think equally, we've got to change what we're measuring so that we can truly say, hey, we are engaging in discipleship. It may not be the way it was 5 years ago, but it's still engaging in reaching these people the way that we're doing it. Yeah, so good. Reggie, go ahead.
I will throw one more, I'll address one more elephant that's in the room that I feel like we have to kind of address. The problem with everything I just said a while ago is if you're sitting there and you're the average pastor, you're going, yes, but the number of people in our building equate to the number of dollars that I get in tithes. So here's a pivot we've got to make, and here's something we've got to rethink. And again, I'm going to go back to something, and I don't mean this as money being the motive, but money is in donations and the giving of people is a part of discipleship, and it's a part of helping people grow, and it's the thing that gives us the ability to do ministry. But somewhere in the context of our definition of what success is, we have to think about the parent, again, who may never come to church. If our goal is to help them identify with Christ and to become a family who follows Jesus, and for whatever reason, they like doing that at home more than they like doing that in your building, what does it look like to attach them to your community of faith or other parents that you're connected to in a community of faith? So if someone were to ask them the question, so what church do you go to? Maybe the question would be different. So what church are you partnering with?
Yeah.
And they say the name of your church. And you help them win as a family when it comes to discipling their kids and their faith of their kids, and you help them as a family grow the character of their kids. they're going to contribute to whatever you're trying to do to help other parents. There's another way to look at this besides the tithe money that shows up on a Sunday morning. But we have to blow up our definition, and we've got to expand it bigger than just a Sundays at church mindset.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. But.
Yeah, it does make
Reggie,
makes
that is so awesome and so helpful. The a pastor emailed me during the week in the UK to say, I know you're having this conversation with Reggie. Please, he said, because I can't tell him, please tell him, thank you. You've saved my life during lockdown. You and the Orange organization, because all the network churches in the UK and in Ireland, we use the Orange content, and it is so fabulous. And it translates perfectly into our culture as well. So they wanted to say thank you for what you're doing there. But I think what's happened over the last half an hour is you have messed with our minds, because I think we'd all sat here with a notepad writing down ready to write down your 3 top tips and how I can keep my kids and my families engaged. And we've gone down this track of talking about, hey, what about reaching families who are unreached? What about reaching out into a community that has no idea we even exist? How about genuinely helping all families, not just trying to keep hold of the ones that are part of our church? And I think I'm sitting here just so excited, because I'm thinking, I want to be part of that. I want to sign up to that. That is a mission work, not just showing up week in and week out and singing some songs about Jonah and the whale, but actually reaching families and helping families and partnering with families to do life better. Oh, sign me up for that. I like that. And I think what you're talking much more to pastors and saying to pastors, you know, this is an opportunity to reach people in a way we've never reached people before. And, you know, we have the racial tensions just like you do. We have, you know, our people think our government in the UK are a bunch of losers right now. You know, their popularity is going down and down and down, and they say the most stupid things. We have a blonde-haired leader who puts his foot in his mouth just as much as you have a orange-faced leader who puts his foot in his mouth. So we have all those.
Don't use the word orange in relationship with
that. So we're in the same boat as you with all of those things. So what you're saying today is changing the perspective for us, and so very helpful. And we are so very grateful. We really are.
Well, thank you guys. I'm surrounded by some great thought leaders. You know, I'm so glad that Dave is moving to Australia for 2 or 3 reasons. One is I'm going to get to come visit him. And 2, I feel like, you know, we want to have some eyes on the ground there to talk about what can we do, you know, globally to make some things happen that we feel like need to happen. And I feel like, you know, when our team pivoted in the middle of this to turn on everything we could so churches could do whatever they needed to do digitally, you know, for 4 months, I mean, you know, we had no income coming into our organization, but it was just the right thing to do as a nonprofit. And we all felt it, because at the end of the day, you know, we're a nonprofit. We feel like there's a mission that we're called to and compelled to kind of make sure that happens. And I do believe what you described a while ago, Duncan, about reaching into the community and parents outside the church, there will be people who just get ignited about who the church is when they see that happening. There are people waiting on the sidelines for a different version of the church that actually measures success by how the community wins and how the family wins, more than how many show up on Sunday morning. Yeah. So they're ready and waiting for a different definition of church.
Reggie, Reggie, go ahead, Dunk.
Can I just ask Reggie one question then? Because I'm trying to put myself in the sandals of the average vicar in the UK, and I think a lot of church leaders right now are thinking to themselves, I get that. I think that's fantastic. I'm all into this. But where do I even begin? I mean, what is my first next step? It feels like you've opened a fire hydrant and poured out so many new ideas to me. Where do I even begin to make this work? What would you suggest I do first?
Well, I have always believed, and I'm probably simple-minded in this way, that if I can put my best leaders around a table, we can figure out anything. And I would start with 2 or 3 questions with some of my most important leaders that are creative and innovative. And they may not actually be on your staff. They may actually be people, you know, in your church that are leaders, because at the end of the day, you have people in the digital spaces, you have people that are CEOs of organizations, and put them around a table and go, okay, here's the question. how can we help parents in this community who don't go to our church win the way they need to win? And what can we do to start building bridges to them so they feel like we're partnering with them? And I would encourage every community, is it vicar? Is that what you said? Vicar?
Vicar.
Every vicar to surround themselves with 3 or 4 thinkers, thought leaders that would challenge the process and create some new ways to measure success. The other thing I would do is what I said earlier, both with the parent and the volunteer. I would make me a short list of my key parents and a short list of my key volunteers, and I would start pouring into them with this kind of mindset, these kind of questions. And let me say this, you have to pick parents and volunteers who share your values. Because we all know that in all of our churches, there are parents and volunteers who might not be outward focused. They're inward focused in the way they read the scriptures. They're inward focused in the way they think about their church. They're inward focused. And it's so tempting over time for us to build our church around those who are inside the church. And that shapes our thinking a certain way. And the reason I think it's important to find parents and volunteers that don't think that way is because they're going to be the future in how you build this. And you have to be intentional about thinking like those on the outside.
Yeah.
I joke about this all the time, and the changes that we made. We started North Point and all the churches I've ever worked in. I have never once had a parent who didn't come to the church call me up and say, have you ever thought about doing this? Because if you would, I might attend. Never had that happen. Yeah. But when I've made a change and it made a parent on the inside mad, I guarantee I got a phone call. So there's this pressure to make your decisions based on that group. I would say surround yourself with leaders that are Christians, leaders who think this way, so that you can start turning the ship toward an outward focused model.
I mean, I love that. And I love the emphasis on volunteers. I mean, just my own personal story. I was with some friends a few nights ago, and they were telling me that they've got 2 teenagers. And since lockdown happened, no one has contacted them from their local church. Middle of March until now, August, yep. They haven't had one contact from the church. Whereas the week before, I was talking to one family from a different church who said, we love our church. Our kids, they're on the phone to us. They've knocked on our door. They've left parcels on the step. They've done crazy things, like they said they bought. I mean, this family said the church bought around a meal for us, for me and my husband to have a meal, while they took the kids in the back garden and played football with them. I mean, wow. Just, they love their church.
I think we're just back to ministry 101. I mean, it's like,
there you go. Yeah. It is. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And you talk about pastors worried that people aren't going to give their dollars or their pounds anymore. Well, when you love them like that and you connect them like that, they're going to love you and want to be part of everything that you do. Yeah. So wise
really
words.
Back to relationship. Yeah.
And Reggie,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, Reggie, I know time is running short, and I want to honor what you've got going on this morning there in Atlanta. One of the things that you've talked about a little bit tonight is that the next generation and these generations that are already with us are watching how we are loving our neighbors. And I know that you have had a burden and a passion for communities that have minorities and people that are marginalized. And quite frankly, you've gone in and essentially adopted Wrightsville there in Georgia as your personal project that you want to invest heavily into. If a church leader is listening to this and says, how could we be a church that could revolutionize the way people perceive us in our community? Not come to our building, not fill our rooms or even donate, but change the perception of how we impact this community. What are some first steps that you would say have been effective in your journey there in Wrightsville that you would say, I think this could translate into your community?
There's so many pieces to that. I mean, I do think that to oversimplify, I have this, and this whole organization is driven by this idea that the best chance a kid has related to having a dynamic faith and a better future are the number of adults who show up in their life consistently. When I showed up in Wrightsville, Georgia, you know, there are a lot of churches that are older there. By that, I mean the congregants, the people who show up, most of them are older than me. And when I would visit the different churches, I wouldn't see kids or teenagers. And it's a small community. I mean, it's a county of about 7,000 people. Maybe 2,000 live in the town. It's 30% under the poverty line. But it still bothered me that kids and teenagers weren't showing up at churches. But after I went to a few, I could understand why. But it dawned on me, and by this I mean, it dawned on me that the church was still the best place to put a consistent adult in the life of a kid or teenager. And so when I started visiting the churches and started meeting with the pastors and started thinking through, you know, how to help the town, it really boiled down to this one idea, that if we can get a consistent leader in the life of a kid or teenager besides the parent, we can give them a better faith or future.
Yeah.
And I know that you can talk about food programs, and you can talk about helping the education system, and we should do all of those things. The church should show up to help public schools. The church should show up on the front lines of whatever issues the community has. But the greatest gift a church can give anybody in a community is another adult in the life of a kid or a teenager that cares about their faith and future.
Yeah.
And we're back to partnering with the parent, because I say faith and future very deliberately.
Yeah.
If you don't care about their future, if you don't love your neighbor, you can't help them love God and care about their faith.
Yeah.
And so I think about a year or two in, I made a very simple decision to transform this community and to get these leaders to be a part of this process. If I could just make that work for 10% of the kids, if I could just get the right 10% of the churches, if I could just get the right 10% of the parents buying into this, we can make 100% difference.
Mm.
And you've got to measure success in those terms. And what happened as a result, and what is happening and continue to happen, I mean, you know, we started our first interracial high school gathering, multi-church gathering about 2 years ago. And we averaged about 40 or 50 teenagers who had never worshiped together, who'd never been in a Bible study context together, you know, in this big, you know, brick barn that was there. And that's about, you know, for me to hang out with 50 teenagers made me more nervous than standing in front of thousands of people communicating about leadership, because the stakes are so high, because these kids are deciding what they think about faith in that context. But 50 to 60 teenagers, there was one night we had about 80. There are only 400, maybe 450 high schoolers in the entire county.
Wow.
So when you look at percentages, you know, and there's another piece of this that I would say too, and I would love for churches to think about this, especially if they're going to do something in the community that changes the way the community sees the church. Something happens when the community sees multiple churches doing things together.
Yes. Yes.
Because when pastors aren't fighting for the people to come to their church, and they're working with other churches to do something in the community, it breaks down the walls in a way nothing else does.
Yes.
It sends a message, because again, this is John 17, right? They'll know we're Christians by our love. I mean,
Yeah.
somewhere in this, we've got to make sure that we're moving those barriers as well, so that it's not simply about this local church owning the needs of the community. It's about these local churches working together and demonstrating. And anyway, that's probably a long piece of the story.
Reggie, it resonates so much. I had the privilege of serving, and you actually came and spent some time with us in Colorado Springs at a church, and we helped to launch this thing called "Cause I Love You," or COS I Love You. Yeah. And you're familiar with it, and Jimmy and the guys at Compassion were helpful in that as well. But the thing that was most unifying and changed the perception of people in the city is the fact that all of these churches were partnering together. The thing that we found that helped us to gain unity is that we went to the leadership of our city, the mayor and the superintendents of school districts and people running all of the schools, and said, hey, we want to learn from you what are the greatest needs that the faith community could help with. Good. We made those things our agenda. And so Good. It wasn't some one church saying, hey, this is what we need to do to help our city. It was really taking on the city's agenda and unifying around that was so helpful. But yeah, it resonates with what you're saying, Reggie.
When one church does it alone, the motive is suspect. When multiple churches do it together,
yeah,
it sends a different message.
Yeah, no, it's so good. Dave and Duncan, I know you guys have got some more questions, but I want to honor the time that we have with you, Reggie. I also want to just, say what everybody in the chat is saying. We've got to get an Orange conference down in Australia and New Zealand. So Reggie, can we get you on record to say, hey, once this COVID thing is taken care of, once we get Dave down here, Irresistible Churches Network, we'd love to partner up and help provide the spaces and all that kind of thing to be able to do that. We'd love to have you come down and do a conference. So is that a yes, I'm assuming?
I need to talk to you about snakes in Australia.
Yeah, okay.
I've heard some rumors about snakes there that make me nervous.
Reggie,
it's all rumors.
Reggie, I told you it's not the snakes that are the issue. It's the huntsman spiders, but we will take care of them for you.
That's it.
We'll take care of them for you.
We have been talking a lot lately about what would it look like for us to come do some kinds of events in Australia. So we're on board. We just got to figure out exactly how and when and what that looks like, and we want to come. So yes.
Can't wait.
That's going to be a huge part of what I'm going to be trying to do is like literally gather some churches together and see what the needs are so that we can put on a conference, an event that will help meet those needs and help serve those churches.
Absolutely. One of the questions that's just come into the chat, and I want to take care of it while people are still here, and then we'll begin to wrap up with some ways that you can contact and connect. One of the questions is, will this recording of this webinar be available for people to watch after the event? And can you share that with other team members, volunteers, that kind of thing, to cast vision from what we've heard from Reggie and Dave today? The answer to that question is yes. Duncan, do you want to really quickly just share where that will be located as far as YouTube is concerned for Further Faster?
Yeah, I can put it in the chat where the Further Faster YouTube page, or you can just go find it yourself. But Perko and myself, we're going to launch a brand new podcast that we've called Bricks and Clicks. It's a church leaders podcast. How do you create both a digital and a physical church, a bricks and a clicks church? And we've already had quite a few conversations. Reggie's been so kind, along with Dave, to join us for this one. And so we're hoping to launch that next month. So watch out for that. So you can listen to it on your journey into work. But it will be available on the Irresistible Churches YouTube page and also on the Further Faster YouTube page as well, along with lots of other conversations. Yeah,
so furtherfaster.network in the UK and Ireland, if you're a church leader in that part of the world. Irresistiblechurches.network if you're down under in Australia. Those websites will have links to our YouTube channels where you can find this video. And then if you go to bricksandclickspodcast.com, you'll be able to find all the information from the podcast as well. And obviously on all of the different social media platforms. Davo, real quick, your email address, if people haven't caught it in the chats, how they can get a hold of you, especially with your move down under. What's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, I would love to be connecting with church leaders in Australia and New Zealand as soon as possible. Like, feel free to hit me up on email. It's dadamson@rethinkgroup.org. I'm about to put it in again. It's in the chat again. And really, I just want to learn from you, hear your story, and then figure out ways that we can partner with you and make that sort of connection. So please hit me up on email. I would love to stay connected.
And then Reggie is a great follow on Instagram, super fun follow. So make sure you at Reggie Joyner follow Reggie on social media. Great way to connect with him as well there. Reggie, any final thoughts, mate, for church leaders that are watching the webinar? Anything you'd like to share from your heart?
I mean, the only thing that I think I would probably share in closing is what I shared at the beginning of our conference. This caught everybody by surprise. Nobody was expecting it. And I have so many leaders who just say, why me? Why now? Why this? And if you're a leader who's leading in the middle of this, I think the question is the wrong question, because I think there's a reason why you are the leader in the middle of this. And with all the discouragement and the exhaustion of trying to figure this out, for whatever reason, God in his sovereign plan decided that you would be situated in the middle of this because he needed you in this to lead through this. So I would just say, keep faith alive, keep hope alive, and keep doing this, because at the end of the day, you are in this time for a reason. So
good. Thank you so much for those words of encouragement, Reggie. I know all of us at some point in this pandemic have probably questioned, God, what are you up to? Why did you choose me to have to face whatever crisis it is in our own church or even in our own families, in our own home, and to know that he's chosen us for such a time as this, and that he'll be with us every step of the way. So encouraging. Well, guys, thank you so much. Reggie, thanks again for carving out an hour of your time on a Thursday morning, very early in the United States. Dave, thanks so much for your time. And Duncan, thanks so much for your partnership in these networks around the world. And to all of you attendees, at the end of the day, webinars are no fun if anybody doesn't show up. So thanks for coming and being a part of this webinar. Have a great afternoon wherever you're watching from. Great evening here in Australia. We'll talk to you soon.
Well, we hope this episode of Bricks and Clicks was helpful. If it was, then we'd love if you could leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you are leading a church in Australia, the UK, or Ireland, we'd love to help you grow your church by reaching unchurched people. Go to www.bricksandclickpodcast.com and click on your country's flag to find a whole bunch of free resources to help your church go further, faster, and become irresistible once again.